October 26, 1965. Around 6:30 p.m., according to police records later cited in court, a teenage boy walks to a payphone on East New York Street in Indianapolis and dials the police. In court records, he is identified as 15-year-old Richard Hobbs. A girl is dead, he tells dispatch. She was sick. When officers arrive at 3850 East New York Street, a gaunt woman named Gertrude Banaszewski hands them a letter. The letter claims a gang of boys attacked the girl and left her there. But before the officers can leave, a 15-year-old girl wearing a steel leg brace approaches them. Her name is Jenny Likens. Her words will change everything. "Get me out of here," she whispers, "and I'll tell you everything." What police find upstairs defies comprehension. A 16-year-old girl lies on a filthy mattress. Autopsy testimony would later document more than 150 separate injuries, and words have been burned into her skin. Prosecutor Leroy New later told the court and the press it was the most terrible crime ever committed in the state of Indiana. How did an entire neighborhood of children participate in months of abuse while adults looked away? And what did Indiana do afterward to make sure this could never happen again? This episode contains no graphic descriptions. We focus on the investigation, the trial, and the legacy. Sylvia Likens deserves to be remembered, not for shock value, but for what her case forced the state to confront. Before we go further, here's the rulebook. Kept simple. We separate what court records and sworn testimony establish, what credible reporting describes, and what remains disputed across sources. Now, 3 objects will guide us through this story. The first, a leather police belt. Witnesses testified it belonged to Gertrude Banaszewski's ex-husband, a former Indianapolis police officer. She kept it and she used it. The second, a heated needle. In the final weeks, multiple witnesses described this needle as an instrument of permanent marking. We'll return to it. The third, a granite memorial. It does not exist in 1965. But local reporting later documented a 6-foot granite memorial dedicated in Willard Park in June 2001, built to remember what happened and what changed because of it. These 3 objects, the belt, the needle, the memorial, form the arc of this case. From cruelty to evidence to legacy, at the center stands Gertrude Banaszewski. 37 years old, divorced, a mother of 7, living on little income as described in testimony from the case. And then the arrangement. 2 girls, a promised return in November, and payments that witnesses put at about $20 a week. Sylvia Marie Likens was born January 3, 1949 in Lebanon, Indiana, the middle child of 5. Her older siblings were twins, Daniel and Diana. Her younger siblings were also twins, Benny and Jenny. Jenny had contracted polio and wore a steel brace on her leg, as later described in court testimony. Their parents, Lester and Betty Likens, worked the carnival circuit, selling concessions at stands across Indiana. Money was tight, the marriage was unstable, and the family moved constantly, details that would come out in testimony and contemporaneous reporting. Sylvia was the protector. Friends and family later described how she watched Jenny at the skating rink, steadying her when she needed it. Friends called Sylvia Cookie. She loved the Beatles. She smiled with her lips closed because she was missing a front tooth, knocked out years earlier, according to people who knew her. Sylvia earned money babysitting and ironing, and family testimony later said she often gave part of it to her mother. On July 3, 1965, Betty Likens was arrested for shoplifting in Indianapolis, an event referenced in later reporting and court testimony. Lester now faced a choice: stop the season and lose income, or find someone to care for his daughters. He chose Gertrude Banaszewski. 2 of Gertrude's children, Paula and Stephanie, attended Arsenal Technical High School with Sylvia and Jenny, according to testimony. Gertrude assured Lester she would treat the girls as if they were her own. Shortly after the 4th of July, Sylvia and Jenny moved into 3850 East New York Street. Trial testimony placed the rent at $55 a month, and the weekly payment for the girls' care at about $20. The plan was simple. Lester and Betty would return in November to collect their girls. Lester Likens later testified he didn't pry into the condition of the house. He saw the living room, once the kitchen, and he believed what he wanted to believe. The first beating came when a payment arrived late, an account described in testimony. Gertrude Banishevsky took the leather police belt, her ex-husband's belt, and struck both Sylvia and Jenny. She told them this was their punishment for their father's failure. By mid-August, something shifted. The abuse narrowed. It focused almost exclusively on Sylvia, a pattern multiple witnesses would later describe. Paula Banishevsky, 17, reportedly disliked Sylvia from the moment she arrived. Gertrude began accusing Sylvia of things she hadn't done. Stealing candy Sylvia had purchased herself, according to testimony. Spreading rumors about the family being unclean. Some investigators and later reporting suggested jealousy was part of Gertrude's motive. Sylvia was young, socially liked, and still had a life ahead of her. Gertrude, at 37, was exhausted. An asthmatic chain smoker with 7 children she struggled to support, as witnesses described. Then Gertrude made a decision that transformed this from domestic abuse into something far darker. She invited the neighborhood in. Court testimony would later include participants as young as 10 years old. Coy Hubbard, 15, was Stephanie Banishevsky's boyfriend. Witnesses described him using Sylvia as a practice dummy for throws. Richard Hobbs, also 15, lived nearby. He watched. Then he joined. Gertrude spread stories to justify the violence. She told neighborhood girls that Sylvia had insulted their mothers. She told her own children that Sylvia was a prostitute, claims the forensic record would later contradict. Outside those walls, no adult intervened in time. The pattern was now established. This was no longer punishment, it was entertainment. And Sylvia had been turned into the target. Reconstruction based on trial testimony and investigative records. September 1965, a weekday afternoon. Diana Shoemaker, Sylvia's older sister, now married, drives to 3850 East New York Street. She has not seen Sylvia or Jenny in weeks. She parks at the curb. She walks to the front door. She knocks. Gertrude Banishevsky answers. She does not open the door fully. She tells Diana she cannot come in. No permission from the girl's parents. Those are the rules, she says. Diana asks to see her sisters. Just for a moment. Gertrude refuses. Through a window, Diana spots Jenny in the yard. Diana calls out. Jenny looks up, then looks away. She says she is not allowed to talk. She turns and walks back toward the house. Diana stands on the sidewalk. Something is wrong. She can feel it. In later testimony, the case record includes mention of an anonymous complaint about a child with open running sores at that address. A public health nurse named Barbara Sanders later testified she visited the home. Gertrude met her at the door. She claimed Sylvia had been kicked out, that Sylvia was the problem, and Sylvia had run away. When the nurse asked to speak with Jenny, Gertrude allowed it. Under threat of punishment, Jenny told the nurse that Sylvia had run away, an account Jenny later confirmed. The nurse left. No further action was taken. On October 5th, 3 weeks before Sylvia's death, Lester Likens visited the house, according to his testimony. He saw the living room, once the kitchen. He noticed nothing wrong. Diana had tried, public health had visited. Sylvia's own father had stood in that house. And still, no one pulled Sylvia out. The system had its chance. The system failed. Case ledger, what we know for sure as established by court records and autopsy testimony. Victim, Sylvia Marie Likens. 16 years old. Born in Lebanon, Indiana. Died October 26, 1965 in Indianapolis. Location, 3850 East New York Street. Upstairs bedroom. Body found on a soiled mattress. Cause of death, autopsy findings listed a subdural hematoma combined with shock and severe malnutrition. Documented injuries, autopsy testimony described more than 150 separate injuries, extensive cigarette burns, and evidence of prolonged starvation and dehydration. Defendants in custody: Gertrude Banaszewski, 37, Paula Banaszewski, 17, John Banaszewski Jr., 12, Richard Hobbs, 15, Coy Hubbard, 15. Additional minors were charged and later testified as state witnesses according to court records. End of ledger. Dr. Charles Ellis performed the autopsy. In trial testimony, he described Sylvia's condition as unlike any he had seen in his prior examinations. The coroner also testified that despite Gertrude's claims about Sylvia being promiscuous, the physical findings did not support that narrative. The forensic record contradicted the story Gertrude tried to sell. Sylvia was not unclean. She was a child who had been starved, beaten, and held captive inside that house. And then there was the needle. Trial testimony described how a heated needle was used to burn words into Sylvia's skin. Gertrude began the marking, then handed the needle to 15-year-old Richard Hobbs to finish. To prosecutors, that needle showed deliberation. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a moment. It was an act meant to leave a permanent message. The autopsy and the testimony turned suspicion into certainty. The evidence could speak, even when Sylvia no longer could. Why did no one stop this? It wasn't that no one knew. People knew. Raymond and Phyllis Vermillion lived nearby. In testimony, they described visiting the Banaszewski house and seeing Sylvia with visible injuries. They also described hearing Paula talk about the mistreatment. They did not report it. Other witnesses testified that neighborhood children were charged a few cents to come in and look at Sylvia like a spectacle. Neighbors also later told investigators they heard screams coming from the house. They heard someone calling for help. But in 1965, many people made the same assumption. What happened inside someone else's home was private, and somebody else would handle it. One neighbor later told investigators the screaming quieted in the early morning hours of October 26th. By that evening, Sylvia was dead. Reconstruction, based on trial testimony mid-October. Late at night, Sylvia makes a decision. She will run. She waits until the house is quiet. She moves toward the front door. She opens it. She steps onto the porch, and Gertrude catches her. Witnesses describe Sylvia being dragged back inside and beaten. Jenny later testified that after this attempt, Sylvia told her, "I know you don't want me to die, but I'm going to die. I know it." There was no coordinated system to connect these warnings into a rescue. And for ordinary neighbors, there was no expectation, social or legal, that they had to intervene. The deadlock was not a failure of information. It was a failure of responsibility. Reconstruction, based on trial testimony. October 22, 1965. Gertrude Banaszewski sits far. Sylvia down at a table. She places paper in front of her. She tells Sylvia to write. The letter must say Sylvia ran away, that she met a group of boys, that the boys attacked her, that they are responsible for everything. Details witnesses later described in court. Sylvia writes. Her hands shake. She knows what the letter means. October 23rd, trial testimony described Gertrude heating a needle over a flame and pressing it into Sylvia's skin. The marking begins. When Gertrude grew too tired to continue, witnesses said she handed the needle to 15-year-old Richard Hobbs. He finished the words. Then, according to witness testimony, there was an attempted branding with a heated object. The mark did not become what they intended, but the intent was clear. Permanent damage. October 25th, night. Gertrude allows Sylvia to sleep upstairs on one condition: she must not wet herself. Sylvia is dehydrated. She asks Jenny for water. She drinks. She sleeps. She wakes in a wet bed, an account Jenny later described. Testimony described a final assault that night involving Coy Hubbard and Gertrude. And by morning, Sylvia could barely respond. October 26th. Morning. Sylvia is carried upstairs for a bath. When they try to lift her from the water, she does not respond. Stephanie Banaszewski later said she attempted mouth-to-mouth. Gertrude shouts that Sylvia is faking it. She is not faking. Richard Hobbs is told to walk to the payphone. He dials the police. The letter is ready. Gertrude believes the plan will work. She is wrong. October 26, 1965. Around 6:30 p.m., 38A50 East New York Street, Indianapolis. Police officers arrive at the house, details described in police accounts and later testimony. Richard Hobbs has called them from a payphone down the street. He reported a sick girl who has died. Gertrude Baniszewski meets them at the door. She is calm. She hands them a letter, the letter Sylvia wrote 4 days earlier. It blames everything on a gang of boys. The officers step inside. They are led upstairs to a bedroom. What they find stops them cold. A 16-year-old girl lies on a filthy mattress. Her body is emaciated. Wounds cover every visible surface. Words have been burned into her skin. Before the officers can leave, Jenny Likens approaches them. 15 years old, wearing her steel brace. She whispers, "Get me out of here, and I'll tell you everything." Court records show arrests followed quickly. Within hours, Gertrude, Paula, John Baniszewski Jr., Richard Hobbs, and Coy Hubbard were in custody. Jenny gave a sworn statement that night, according to case records. She detailed months of abuse. She explained why she had not sought help earlier. She said she was scared, and she said Gertrude kept beating her. Jenny is 15. She has polio. She has watched her older sister, her protector, be destroyed over nearly 3 months. She has been threatened. She has been beaten when she tried to help. She has been told that if she speaks, she will be next. And now, with police officers just feet away, she makes a choice. She speaks. That choice will put people in prison, and it will force Indiana to confront what it had no framework to stop. On December 30th, 1965, grand jury indictments were returned in Marion County, according to court records. Prosecutor Leroy New again described the case to the press as Indiana's most terrible crime. The trial was set for April 1966. How did so many people witness months of abuse, yet no one intervened in time? Because fear works, because communities look away, and because in 1965, Indiana did not yet have the broad reporting framework it has today. April 18, 1966. Indianapolis City County Building. Court records show the trial begins. 5 defendants sit at the defense table: Gertrude Baniszewski, her daughter Paula, her son John Jr., and neighbors Richard Hobbs and Coy Hubbard. A 6th defendant is missing. Stephanie Baniszewski, 15, had been released weeks earlier. Court filings show her attorney argued the state lacked sufficient evidence. In exchange for immunity, Stephanie agreed to testify. Prosecutors Leroy New and Marjorie Wessner made their position clear in court. They pursued the harshest penalties available and argued the defendants acted together over months. Gertrude's attorney, William Urbecker, chose a different road: not guilty by reason of insanity. 3 court-appointed psychiatrists examined Gertrude before trial. All 3 testified she was sane, an exchange preserved in the trial record. The courtroom becomes our 3rd evidence motif. Contemporary reporting described the case as a spectacle. Seats filled, headlines blared. The city watched its own reflection, what it allowed and what it ignored. Judge Saul Isaac Rabb presided. Court rulings show he denied repeated defense motions for a change of venue and for separate trials. All 5 defendants would face the jury together. One defense attorney later wrote that the judge repeatedly instructed jurors to consider certain evidence only against certain defendants, an almost impossible mental separation in a joint trial. And that is the pressure point. The prosecution had to prove premeditation across defendants of wildly different ages and involvement. The defense had to separate clients from a crime committed collectively in the same rooms over weeks. So the question was no longer only guilt. The question was, what does accountability look like when a community fails through action, through silence, and through delay? May 19, 1966. Indianapolis City County Building. After deliberations that court records place at more than 8 hours, 8 men and 4 women file back into the courtroom. The defendants sit motionless. The foreman rises. Guilty of first-degree murder. Sentence: life imprisonment. The prosecution had asked for the electric chair. The jury chose life. Guilty of second-degree murder. Sentence: life imprisonment. John Banishki Jr., Richard Hubbard, guilty of manslaughter. Sentences: 2 to 21 years each, according to the judgments entered in court. In closing arguments, trial coverage and later accounts describe Deputy Prosecutor Marjorie Wessner holding up a photograph of Sylvia, taken before July 1965, before the Banishki house, before everything. Jenny Likens took the witness stand during the trial. Contemporary reporting described her walking to the front with her steel brace, wearing a new dress. Her voice was sometimes firm, sometimes halting. She described what was done to her sister. She explained why she had not sought help. She told the court she was scared, and she said Gertrude kept beating her. The courtroom, our third evidence motif, delivered its verdict. Convictions entered. A city forced to look at what it had allowed to happen, but the judgment was not the end. Appeals would follow. Some sentences would be reduced. Some defendants would walk free quickly. Facts later reflected in appellate decisions and parole records. And in the Indiana General Assembly, legislators were already asking a different question. How do we make sure no child is trapped in plain sight like this again? The verdicts did not hold, at least not at first. In 1970, the Indiana Supreme Court reversed the convictions, ruling that the trial court had erred by denying motions tied to venue and severance, and that the publicity had been too intense, an outcome documented in the appellate record. A 1971 retrial convicted Gertrude of first-degree murder. Again, she received another life sentence. Paula later pleaded guilty to manslaughter in the aftermath of the reversal and retrial process and was released not long after. Facts reflected in later court records and reporting. John Banishki Jr., Richard Hobbs, and Coy Hubbard were paroled in the late 1960s after relatively short time served, according to parole-era reporting. In 1985, Gertrude was granted parole. Contemporary reporting noted a public petition, tens of thousands of signatures, urging officials to keep her imprisoned. She changed her name, she moved out of state, and in 1990 she died in Iowa. Now the motif triad returns. The leather police belt, described in testimony as the instrument of early beatings, was entered into evidence. The heated needle, used to burn words into Sylvia's skin, linked Gertrude to deliberation, and prosecutors leaned on it to prove intent. And the granite memorial, 6 feet tall, was formally dedicated in Willard Park in June 2001, according to local reporting and memorial documentation. Sylvia's death is widely credited with accelerating Indiana's child protection reforms. Today, Indiana law requires any person who has reason to believe a child is a victim of abuse or neglect to report it, and state guidance notes that knowingly failing to report can be a misdemeanor. In 2016, local reporting documented that the Boone County Child Advocacy Center was renamed Sylvia's Child Advocacy Center in her honor. Jenny Likens, the girl with the steel brace who whispered to police to get her out of there, and she would tell them everything, died in 2004, according to published records. Much remains disputed about the internal dynamics of the Banishki household, what Gertrude truly believed, what motivated each child, whether any felt genuine remorse. We've stayed with what the record can support. The rest belongs to silence. The house at 3850 East New York Street was demolished in 2009, according to local reporting. The address remains, but the rooms are gone. Sylvia Likens is not. Her name is carved in granite. Her case changed the law. And every time someone in Indiana picks up the phone to report a child in danger, they are honoring her legacy, whether they know it or not. Next episode, we travel to another state, another case that shook a community and forced a reckoning with what we owe to the most vulnerable. Until then.